thought I knew my family. I thought blood meant loyalty, and home meant safety. I was wrong on both counts. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and this is the story of how my father disowned me at Thanksgiving dinner in front of our entire family, calling me dead to them forever. What he didn't expect was that I'd take his words literally and disappear from their lives completely, only to return 8 months later with the power to destroy everything he'd built. Some might call it revenge. I call it justice. And by the end of this story, you'll understand why sometimes the only way to save a family is to tear it apart first. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in Millbrook, Ohio, I always believed I was living the American dream. Our house at 1247 Maple Street was the kind of place you see in movies, with its white picket fence, perfectly manicured lawn, and the big oak tree in the front yard where my siblings and I used to build forts every summer. My father, Bob Mitchell, owned Mitchell Construction Company, a business his father had started in the 1960s that had grown into one of the most respected contractors in our county. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable, and more importantly, we were close. Sunday dinners were sacred in our house. Every week without fail, the whole family would gather around our large mahogany dining table. Dad would carve the roast while Mom Linda fussed over the side dishes. My older brother Jake would entertain us with stories from his accounting firm, always trying to make numbers sound interesting, while my younger sister Emma would update us on her nursing program and the patients who touched her heart. I'd share updates from my job at Henderson Marketing Solutions downtown, and we'd all laugh together like families do in commercials. Those Sunday dinners taught me that family was everything. Dad would always say that Mitchell blood runs thicker than water, that we stick together no matter what, and that the family business would always be there for us kids when we were ready to join. Jake had already started helping with the books part-time, and Emma was considering switching from nursing to business management after graduation. I was the only one who seemed content staying in my marketing career, but Dad never pressured me. He'd just smile and say there was always a place for me when I was ready. Our mornings started early in the Mitchell house. Dad would be up by 5:30, brewing his coffee black and strong, reading the local newspaper cover to cover before heading to the construction sites. Mom would leave by 7 for her real estate showings, always looking polished and professional. The routine was comforting, predictable, safe. I'd drive the 45 minutes from my apartment in downtown Cleveland back to Millbrook whenever I missed that sense of stability, that feeling of belonging somewhere that couldn't be shaken. Christmas mornings were magical. Dad would dress up as Santa every year, even when we were teenagers, claiming he couldn't break tradition until there were grandchildren to carry it on. Mom would make her famous cinnamon rolls, and we'd open presents by the fireplace while snow fell outside our living room windows. These weren't just memories, they were the foundation of who I thought I was. Sarah Mitchell, the marketing coordinator who came from a loving family, who had roots that went deep into Ohio soil, who could always count on coming home. I genuinely believed that nothing could destroy what we had built together. Dad taught me to drive in the parking lot behind his office building, patiently explaining how to parallel park while Jake and Emma cheered from the back seat. When I graduated college, he cried during my valedictorian speech, telling everyone within earshot that his daughter was going to change the world. When I started dating Marcus, my software engineer boyfriend, Dad welcomed him with open arms, taking him fishing and teaching him how to properly grill steaks on our back patio. The family business was thriving. Mitchell Construction had expanded from residential work to commercial projects, building shopping centers and office complexes throughout central Ohio. Dad employed nearly 30 people, many of whom had been with the company for over a decade. He was respected in the community, served on the city council, and donated generously to local charities. People would stop him at the grocery store just to shake his hand and thank him for the work his company had done on their homes. But underneath all this apparent perfection, something was shifting, and I was too blind to see it. The first sign should have been the way Dad started locking his office door at home, something he'd never done before. The second should have been how he'd change the subject whenever anyone asked specific questions about the bigger commercial contracts. The third should have been the way his mood would darken whenever Jake mentioned wanting to do a full audit of the company books as part of his transition into the family business. I was so focused on my own life, my career at Henderson Marketing, my relationship with Marcus, my plans for the future, that I missed the warning signs. I trusted completely. I believed that the man who taught me to ride a bike, who walked me down the aisle at my high school graduation, who promised me that his door was always open no matter what, would never betray that trust. I believed that the family who gathered every Sunday, who celebrated every holiday together, who supported each other through every crisis, was unbreakable. The morning routine continued unchanged. Dad still read his newspaper and drank his black coffee. Mom still left for her real estate appointments looking professional and confident. Emma still called every few days to share stories from her nursing rotations. Jake still worked late into the evening, balancing his accounting firm clients with helping Dad manage the construction company finances. Everything looked normal from the outside, perfect even. I remember the last normal Sunday dinner we had together. It was early November, and Mom had made her pot roast with those little red potatoes that Jake always fought Emma for. Dad was in a good mood, joking about how he'd have to buy a bigger truck to carry all the tools he'd accumulated over the years. We talked about Thanksgiving plans, about who would bring what dishes, about how Grandma Rose from the senior living community would stay with us for the long weekend like she did.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Every year. I volunteered to make the stuffing, my specialty that everyone actually looked forward to. That evening, I drove back to my Cleveland apartment feeling grateful for the life I'd been given. Marcus was waiting with takeout Chinese food and stories about his latest software project. We talked about maybe getting engaged soon, about how wonderful it would be to raise kids with grandparents like mine, about building something as solid and lasting as what my parents had created. I fell asleep that night feeling blessed, feeling secure, feeling like I knew exactly who I was and where I belonged. The weather in Ohio that November was unusually warm, with temperatures reaching the 60s most days. I remember thinking it felt like a good omen, like the universe was smiling on our family as we prepared for another perfect holiday season. I spent extra time picking out the perfect bottle of wine to bring to Thanksgiving dinner, wanting everything to be just right. I even bought a new dress, something elegant but not too formal, in deep burgundy, because Dad always said I looked beautiful in red. Marcus and I had planned to announce our engagement at Christmas, but we were both so happy that we considered moving it up to Thanksgiving. We'd picked out the ring together the week before, a simple solitaire that caught the light perfectly. He was nervous about asking Dad for my hand officially, practicing his speech in our bathroom mirror when he thought I wasn't listening. The future felt bright and certain, full of Sunday dinners and Christmas mornings and all the traditions we'd carry forward to our own children. I called Mom 3 days before Thanksgiving to confirm what time I should arrive and whether she needed help with any of the preparations. Her voice sounded slightly strained, but I attributed it to the normal stress of hosting a big family dinner. She mentioned that Dad had been working longer hours lately, trying to finish up some big commercial projects before the holiday, and I offered to help with anything she needed. She assured me everything was under control, that I should just focus on bringing myself and that famous stuffing recipe. The night before Thanksgiving, I couldn't sleep. Not from anxiety, but from excitement. I loved our family gatherings, loved the chaos of everyone talking at once, loved watching Dad carve the turkey with the same ceremonial precision he'd used since I was a child. I loved how Grandma Rose would tell the same stories about Dad as a little boy, and how he'd pretend to be embarrassed but secretly enjoyed every word. I loved how we'd all collapse in the living room afterward, too full to move, watching football and planning our Black Friday shopping strategy. I woke up that Thanksgiving morning and put on my new burgundy dress, taking extra care with my makeup and hair. Marcus had an early flight to visit his own family in Michigan, so I was going alone, which was actually perfect because it meant I could stay as late as I wanted without worrying about his schedule. I picked up the wine I'd chosen, grabbed the bag of ingredients for my stuffing, and made the familiar drive from Cleveland to Millbrook with Christmas music already playing on the radio. The house looked exactly as it always did during holidays. Mom had put up the fall decorations, with pumpkins and colorful leaves arranged on the front porch. The smell of turkey was already drifting from the kitchen windows, and I could see Grandma Rose's car in the driveway, which meant she'd arrived safely from Sunset Manor. Everything was exactly as it should be, exactly as it had been for the past 28 years of my life. I grabbed my contributions to dinner and walked up the front steps, key ready to let myself in like I always did, completely unprepared for the fact that this would be the last time I ever entered that house as a welcome member of the Mitchell family. I turned the key in the lock and pushed open the front door, expecting to be greeted by the usual chaos of holiday preparation. Instead, I walked into complete silence. The house felt different somehow, like the air itself had changed. The familiar warmth that always wrapped around me when I came home was gone, replaced by something cold and heavy that I couldn't quite identify. "Hello," I called out, setting my purse and the wine on the entryway table. "I'm here." Usually this announcement would bring Mom rushing from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, ready to put me to work chopping vegetables or stirring gravy. Today nobody came. I could hear muffled voices coming from the direction of Dad's home office, low and serious, the kind of conversation that stops when someone unexpected walks into the room. I made my way toward the kitchen, my heels clicking against the hardwood floors that Dad had installed himself 5 years ago. The turkey was indeed in the oven, and all the familiar Thanksgiving smells were there, but something felt off. The kitchen island was covered with ingredients, but they looked a bit abandoned, as if Mom had stopped in the middle of her preparations. A half-chopped onion sat on the cutting board, browning at the edges. A pot of cranberry sauce had boiled over on the stove, leaving dark red stains on the white ceramic surface. "Mom," I called again, louder this time, "where is everyone?" The voices from Dad's office stopped completely. After a moment that stretched too long, I heard footsteps, and Jake appeared in the kitchen doorway. My older brother looked terrible. His usually neat hair was disheveled, his dress shirt wrinkled, and his face carried an expression I'd never seen before. It wasn't sadness exactly, or anger, but something worse. It was the look of someone who'd lost something they thought was permanent. "Sarah," he said, and my name sounded strange coming from his mouth, like he was testing how it felt to say it. "You're here." "Of course I'm here," I replied, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow even to me. "It's Thanksgiving, where else would I be? Is everything okay? Mom seems to have a baby in the kitchen, and you look like someone died." Jake winced at my choice of words, which should have been my first real warning that something was seriously wrong. "Dad wants to see you," he said quietly. "In his office, before dinner." "Okay," I said slowly. "Is this about Christmas gifts? Because I already told him I don't need anything this year. Marcus and I are trying to save money." Jake looked away, unable to meet my eyes. "Just go to his office, Sarah. He's waiting." The walk down the hallway to Dad's office felt longer than usual. The walls were lined with family photos spanning decades, pictures of birthday parties and graduations and Christmas mornings. I'd looked at these same photos thousands of times, but today they seemed to be watching me, like evidence of something that was about to be taken away. I paused outside Dad's door, hearing voices again, low and urgent. I recognized Dad's voice, and Uncle Tom's, but there was a third voice I didn't know. I knocked twice, the way I'd been taught as a child. "Dad, Jake said you wanted to see me." "Come in," came Dad's voice, but it sounded different. Formal. Cold. I opened the door, and stepped into the office that had always been Dad's sanctuary. The walls were covered with awards and certificates from the construction industry, photos of buildings his company had constructed, and his framed business license that he was so proud of. Dad was sitting behind his large oak desk, but he wasn't alone. Uncle Tom sat in one of the leather chairs across from him, and a man I didn't recognize occupied the other chair. The stranger was wearing an expensive-looking suit and holding a briefcase. "Sarah," Dad said without getting up. "Sit down." There was no warmth in his voice, no smile, no invitation for a hug. This wasn't the man. He was little princess for 28 years. This was a stranger wearing my father's face. "What's going on?" I asked, remaining standing. "Who is this?" The man in the suit cleared his throat. "Miss Mitchell, my name is David Reynolds. I'm an attorney representing your father's business interests." My stomach dropped. "Attorney? Dad, what's happening? Why do you need an attorney on Thanksgiving?" Dad finally looked directly at me, and what I saw in his eyes made my knees weak. There was no love there, no paternal affection, no warmth. There was only cold calculation, and something that looked almost like hatred. "Sarah," he said, his voice deadly calm, "we need to discuss your future relationship with this family." "My future relationship?" I repeated the words, not making sense. "What are you talking about?" Uncle Tom shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Bob, maybe we should wait until after the holiday. This isn't the time or place." "No, Dad said firmly. "This is exactly the time and place. Sarah needs to understand where things stand." The attorney opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder. "Miss Mitchell, there are some documents here that require your attention. Specifically, they concern your access to family assets and your involvement in family business matters." I felt like I was in a nightmare, like someone had switched out my real family for actors playing cruel versions of them. I don't understand what's happening here. Dad, can you please explain to me what this is about? Dad leaned back in his chair, studying me like I was a problem he needed to solve. Sarah, you've always been smart. Too smart for your own good, some might say. So I'm not going to insult your intelligence by pretending this is something it's not. Pretending what is something it's not. My voice was getting higher, more strained. You've been asking questions. Dad said, Jake tells me you've been curious about the company finances. About some of the bigger contracts we've been taking on. This was true. Over the past few months, I'd noticed that Mitchell Construction seemed to be landing unusually large commercial projects, the kind of jobs that typically went to much bigger companies with more resources. When I'd asked Jake about it over lunch a few weeks ago, he'd seemed evasive, changing the subject to talk about his own accounting clients instead. I was just interested, I said. I'm proud of what you've built. I wanted to understand how the business was growing so quickly. And that's the problem. Dad said, your interest, your questions, your need to understand things that don't concern you. The attorney leaned forward. Miss Mitchell, your father has reason to believe that you might become a liability to the family business operations. A liability. The word hit me like a physical blow. Dad, how could I be a liability? I work in marketing. I don't even work for you. Exactly, Dad said. You don't work for me. You don't depend on me. You have your own career, your own life, your own boyfriend, who might influence your decisions. You're not invested in protecting what this family has built. I stared at him, trying to process what I was hearing. Protecting what we've built. Dad, what are you talking about? What needs protecting? Uncle Tom cleared his throat again. Bob, I really think this should wait. No, Dad said sharply. She's been sniffing around, asking Jake questions about contracts and revenues. It's only a matter of time before she starts digging deeper, and I can't have that. Digging deeper into what? I demanded. Dad, you're scaring me. What's going on? Dad stood up slowly, his hands flat on the desk surface. What's going on, Sarah, is that you've become a risk I can't afford to take. The room fell silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be my father, the man who'd taught me to always tell the truth, who'd raised me to believe that family was everything. I don't understand, I whispered. The attorney pulled out several documents and spread them on the desk. These papers formally restrict your access to family business information and assets. They also establish clear boundaries regarding your involvement in family matters going forward. I looked at the papers, but the words were swimming before my eyes. Dad, what is this? What are you doing? What I have to do?
No!
Dad said. What I should have done. Months ago when you started asking questions you had no business asking. I'm your daughter, I said. My voice breaking. I have every right to ask questions about my own family.
No!
Do you? Dad asked. Do you really? You've made it clear that you have your own life, your own priorities. You chose a career outside the family business. You chose a boyfriend we barely know. You've chosen independence over loyalty. That's not true, I said desperately. I love this family. I've never been disloyal. I've never done anything to hurt any of you. Haven't you? Dad asked. Then why were you asking Jake about the Morrison contract? Why were you curious about the timeline on the Henderson project? Why were you wondering about cash flow and profit margins? The Morrison contract. I remembered asking Jake about it because it seemed impossibly large for a company our size. The Henderson project had caught my attention because the timeline seemed unrealistic. But these were innocent questions, the kind of casual curiosity anyone might have about their family's business. I was just interested, I said again. I was proud of how well the company was doing. Interested enough to start investigating. Dad said, interested enough to potentially cause problems for all of us. Problems. I was getting angry now, the fear giving way to confusion and hurt. What kind of problems? Dad, what aren't you telling me? The attorney cleared his throat. Miss Mitchell, these documents also outline the consequences of any attempts to interfere with family business operations, or to share confidential information with outside parties. I stared at him. Like who? Like your boyfriend. Dad said, like your friend.
No!
like anyone who might use information about this family's business to cause us harm. I felt like the floor was tilting under my feet. Dad, I would never share confidential information. I would never do anything to hurt this family. How can you even think that? Because you're not really part of this family anymore, Dad said quietly. Are you, Sarah? You have your own life. Your own plans. Your own loyalties that don't include us. That's not true, I said, tears starting to blur my vision. You're my family. You're everything to me. Then prove it, Dad said. Sign these papers. Agree to the restrictions. Promise that you'll stop asking questions and accept that there are parts of this family's business that don't concern you. I looked down at the documents, trying to read through my tears. The legal language was complex, but certain phrases stood out. Waiver of access to business records. Acknowledgement of limited family involvement. Agreement to confidentiality restrictions. And if I don't sign, I asked. Dad and the attorney exchanged a look. Then we'll have to consider you a potential threat to the family's well-being. The attorney said. And we'll have to take appropriate measures to protect our interests. Appropriate measures. I repeated. What does that mean? Dad's expression was stone cold. It means you'll no longer be welcome in this house. It means you'll no longer be included in family events or decisions. It means you'll no longer be considered a member of the Mitchell family. The words hit me like physical blows. I staggered backward, reaching for something to steady myself. You're disowning me. Because I asked a few innocent questions about the family business. They weren't innocent. Dad said. And this isn't just about questions. This is about loyalty. This is about trust. This is about understanding that sometimes family means accepting things without needing to understand. But I don't understand. I said desperately. I don't understand what you're so afraid of. I don't understand what you think I might do. I don't understand. Asking about contracts makes me disloyal. Then you have a choice to make. Dad said. Sign the papers and remain part of this family with clearly defined boundaries. Or refuse to sign and accept the consequences. I looked at Uncle Tom, hoping to see some sympathy, some indication that he thought this was as insane as I did. But he was staring at his hand, refusing to meet my eyes. Uncle Tom, I said. Please, talk to him. This is crazy. Uncle Tom finally looked up, and I saw pain in his eyes. Sarah, honey, just sign the papers. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Harder than it has to be. I stared at him. He's threatening to disown me over nothing. How could this be any harder? Because you're not seeing the bigger picture. Dad said. You're not understanding. What's at stake here? Then explain it to me. I begged. Help me understand. I'm your daughter. Talk to me. Some things can't be explained. Dad said. Some things have to be accepted on faith. And if you can't accept this family's decisions without questioning them, then maybe you don't belong in this family. After all. The room fell silent again. I stood there, holding the papers, trying to process what was happening. My father, the man who'd raised me to be independent and strong, and questioning, was now demanding that I stop being all of those things. He was asking me to sign away my right to care about my family's business, to promise to never ask questions, to accept being treated like an outsider in my own home. I need time to think. I said finally. No, Dad said. You decide now. Sign the papers or leave. Leave. I whispered. Dad, it's Thanksgiving. It's our family dinner. Not if you're not family anymore, he said. I looked around the room one more time, searching for some sign that this was all a terrible misunderstanding. That someone would start laughing and tell me it was an elaborate joke. But all I saw were three men staring at me, waiting for me to choose between my principles and my family. I set the papers down on the desk without signing them. Then I guess I'm not family anymore, I said quietly. Part 3. Initial shock and denial. The walk from Dad's office to the front door felt like moving through thick water. Every step was deliberate and strange, like I was learning how to walk all over again. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip my purse and the bottle of wine I'd brought. The wine I'd spent so much time choosing because I wanted everything to be perfect for our family dinner. Behind me, I could hear Dad's voice, low and urgent, talking to the attorney. I caught fragments of words that didn't make sense together. Protective measures. Liability management. Asset security. These weren't words that belonged in the same conversation as Thanksgiving dinner, weren't concepts that should exist in the same universe as the family I thought I knew. I fumbled with the front door handle, my fingers not working properly. The simple act of turning a doorknob had become monumentally difficult, like my body was rejecting the idea of leaving this house. This was supposed to be my home. This was supposed to be my safe place. I was supposed to be in the kitchen right now, helping Mom with the stuffing, listening to Grandma Rose tell stories about Dad as a little boy, laughing with Emma about her latest nursing school adventures. Instead, I was being expelled like a stranger, like someone who'd never belonged here at all. The November air hit my face as I stepped outside, unseasonably warm but feeling arctic against my skin.
Oh.
I could hear the sounds of normal Thanksgiving preparations from neighboring houses. The Hendersons next door had relatives over, kids playing in their backyard, the sound of laughter drifting over the fence. 2 houses down, I could smell turkey roasting and hear football commentary from someone's television. Normal families having normal holidays, completely unaware that my entire world had just imploded 50 feet away. I stood on the front porch for several minutes, unable to move forward. My car was parked in the driveway, the same spot I'd been parking in for years, but it looked foreign now, like it belonged to someone else. Everything looked the same as it had 30 minutes ago, but everything was different. The white picket fence looked like a barrier instead of an embrace. The perfectly manicured lawn looked like a stage set rather than a real place where real people lived real lives. My phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus. "How's dinner prep going? Missing you already. Tell your dad I said Happy Thanksgiving." I stared at the message, trying to remember who Marcus was, trying to remember who I was supposed to be. Sarah Mitchell, the marketing coordinator with the loving family and the perfect boyfriend and the bright future. But that person didn't exist anymore, did she? That person had just been erased by a conversation in a home office, eliminated by legal documents and cold stares from the man who was supposed to love her unconditionally. I couldn't text Marcus back. How do you explain to someone that your entire identity has just been stripped away? How do you tell the person you're planning to marry that his future in-laws have just declared you dead to them? How do you admit that the family he's been so excited to join has rejected you completely? I finally forced myself to walk to my car, each step feeling like a small betrayal of the person I'd been when I'd walked up these same steps an hour ago. I set the wine bottle on the passenger seat, the wine that would never be opened, never be shared, never be part of the celebration I'd been looking forward to for weeks. It sat there like an accusation, a reminder of how naive I'd been, how completely I'd misunderstood my own life. The drive back to Cleveland passed in a blur of confusion and disbelief. I kept expecting my phone to ring.
Expecting Dad's voice to fill my car with apologies and explanations. "Sarah, honey, come back. We made a terrible mistake. It was all a misunderstanding." But the phone stayed silent except for 2 more texts from Marcus that I couldn't bring myself to read. I drove through the Thanksgiving traffic, past families heading to dinners and celebrations, past grocery stores closed for the holiday, past the normal markers of a normal day that no longer applied to my life. At red lights, I caught myself checking my reflection in the rearview mirror, looking for signs that I'd changed, that this transformation from daughter to stranger was visible somehow. But I looked exactly the same. Same brown hair, same green eyes, same face that Dad used to say looked just like Mom's when she was young. When I finally reached my apartment building in downtown Cleveland, I sat in the parking garage for 20 minutes, unable to get out of the car. The concrete walls and fluorescent lighting felt appropriate somehow, sterile and cold and nothing like home. I'd always thought of this apartment as temporary, a stepping stone before Marcus and I got married and moved to something bigger, something suitable for raising kids who would visit their grandparents every Sunday and spend holidays in the house on Maple Street. Now this apartment felt permanent in a way that was terrifying. This was it. This was my life now. 4 walls and a lease agreement and no family to fall back on. I finally made it inside, still carrying the wine bottle like evidence of the crime that had been committed against me. My apartment looked exactly as I'd left it that morning, but everything felt different. The photos on my refrigerator, pictures of family gatherings and birthday parties, looked like artifacts from someone else's life. The Christmas decorations I'd started putting up early because I was so excited about the holidays looked ridiculous now, cheerful and naive and completely out of place. I called in sick to work for the rest of the week. When my supervisor asked if everything was okay, I found myself unable to explain what had happened. Family emergency, I said, which was both completely true and utterly inadequate. How do you tell your boss that your family has fired you? How do you explain that you've been downsized from daughter to non-entity? Marcus called that evening when his family dinner was over. Hey beautiful, how was your day? Did your dad like the wine you picked out? I stared at the unopened bottle sitting on my kitchen counter. The wine was fine, I said. You sound weird, Marcus said. Everything okay? How was dinner? Dinner was fine. I lied. I'm just tired. Did you tell them about our engagement plans? I know we were going to wait until Christmas, but I'm so excited I can barely contain myself. Our engagement plans. Our future together. Our life that was supposed to include Sunday dinners and Christmas mornings and children who would grow up calling my parents grandma and grandpa. All of that felt impossible now, like planning a vacation to a country that didn't exist. I didn't tell them, I said. The timing wasn't right. That's okay, Marcus said, his voice warm and understanding. We have plenty of time. Christmas will be perfect for the announcement. Christmas. The holiday I'd been looking forward to, the magical morning that happened every year in the house on Maple Street. Would I even be invited? Would there be a place for me under the tree Dad had taught me to decorate? Would there be a stocking with my name on it hanging from the mantel he'd built with his own hands? Sarah, are you sure you're okay? You sound really distant. I'm fine, I said again, just processing the day. Well, get some rest, Marcus said. I can't wait to see you tomorrow. I have so many stories about my nephew's first Thanksgiving. He got cranberry sauce all over everything. After we hung up, I sat in my living room staring at nothing. The silence was different from the peaceful quiet I usually enjoyed in my apartment. This silence felt hollow, like an absence of something essential. I'd always thought of myself as independent, proud of my ability to live on my own, to build a career, to make my own decisions. But now I realized how much of my independence had been built on the foundation of knowing I had a family to return to, a home base that would always welcome me back. That foundation was gone now, and I felt like I was floating in space with nothing to anchor me. I tried to reconstruct the conversation in Dad's office, to find some clue I'd missed, some explanation for what had happened. The questions I'd asked Jake about the business had been innocent, hadn't they? I was proud of Dad's success, curious about how he'd managed to land such big contracts. I'd never suspected anything wrong, never imagined that there might be secrets worth protecting. But now, replaying Dad's words, I began to wonder what I'd missed. Some things can't be explained, he'd said. Some things have to be accepted on faith. What things? What was he so afraid I might discover? The attorney's presence bothered me too. Why did Dad need a lawyer on Thanksgiving? Why were their papers already prepared, as if they'd been planning this confrontation for weeks? The whole thing felt orchestrated, like they'd been watching me, evaluating my questions, deciding that I was a threat to something I didn't even understand. I spent the weekend in a fog of disbelief, moving through my apartment like a ghost. I kept picking up my phone to call Mom, to call Emma, to call Jake, then remembering that I wasn't supposed to do that anymore. They weren't my family anymore. I wasn't their daughter, their sister, their blood relative who had rights and claims and automatic inclusion in their lives. Saturday morning, I found myself driving toward Millbrook without really deciding to do it. I got halfway there before I realized what I was doing, and turned around. Where was I going? To demand explanations, to beg for forgiveness for crimes I didn't understand. To stand on the front porch of the house, I was no longer welcome in and plead my case to people who'd already decided I was guilty of something. Sunday came and went without the traditional family dinner. I'd never missed a Sunday dinner in my adult life unless I was traveling for work or sick with the flu. The absence felt physical, like phantom pain from a limb that had been amputated. I kept checking the time, calculating what would be happening at the house on Maple Street. Dad would be carving the roast. Mom would be fussing over the vegetables. Jake would be telling his stories. Emma would be sharing updates from school, and there would be an empty chair where I was supposed to be sitting. Did they miss me? Did they talk about the empty chair, about the daughter and sister who was no longer part of their Sunday tradition? Or had they simply closed ranks, adjusted to my absence like water flowing around a stone? Monday morning arrived with the cruel normalcy of routine. I had to go back to work, had to pretend that my life hadn't completely changed, had to sit in meetings and answer emails, and discuss marketing strategies like I was still the same person I'd been the week before. My colleagues asked about my Thanksgiving, and I found myself lying smoothly, describing a dinner that had never happened with a family that no longer claimed. "How's your dad's construction business doing?" asked Jennifer from accounting. The same Jennifer who'd been asking about Dad's company for months because she was thinking of hiring him to renovate her kitchen. "Fine," I said. "Business is good." But even as I said it, I wondered if that was true. What was Dad so afraid of? What questions had I asked that were so dangerous? What secrets was the family business hiding that were worth disowning a daughter to protect? For the first time since Thursday, I felt something other than shock and hurt. I felt curious, and then underneath the curiosity, I felt the first stirring of something that might have been anger. Part 4. Entering the new reality. 3 weeks passed in a strange suspended state. I went to work, came home, ate dinner alone, and tried to pretend that my life hadn't been completely upended. Marcus noticed my mood, but attributed it to holiday stress and work pressure. I let him believe that because the alternative was admitting that everything he thought he knew about my family was a lie. The hardest part was maintaining the fiction that nothing had changed. When Marcus suggested we go Christmas shopping for my family, I had to make excuses. When he asked about our Christmas dinner plans, I deflected. When he mentioned how excited he was to officially ask Dad for my hand in marriage, I felt sick to my stomach. But the real test came when Emma called. It was a Tuesday evening in mid-December. I was sitting in my apartment, trying to focus on a marketing presentation for work, when my phone rang. Emma's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment I just stared at it. This was my little sister, the one who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. The one I'd helped with her homework and driven to her first job interview. Did she even know what had happened? Had Dad told the family that I was no longer welcome, or were they all just supposed to pretend I didn't exist? I answered on the fourth ring. "Sarah." Emma's voice sounded strange, uncertain. "Hi, Em." I tried to sound normal, casual like sisters who talked all the time. "How are you?" "I'm okay," she said. But there was something in her tone that suggested she wasn't okay.
Oh.
"I was calling because I wanted to talk to you about Thanksgiving." My heart stopped. "What about Thanksgiving?" "Well," Emma hesitated. "Dad said you had to leave early because of work stuff, but you seemed really upset when you left. Jake said you looked like you'd been crying." Jake had seen me leave. He'd watched me walk out of the house in tears, carrying the wine I'd never opened, and he'd said nothing. He'd let me go without a word, without trying to stop me, without asking if I was okay. "I was fine," I lied. "Just work stress." "But you missed dinner," Emma said. "You never miss family dinner. And then you didn't come to Sunday dinner either, or the next week, or last week. Mom keeps setting a place for you, and then having to take it away when you don't show up." The image of Mom setting my place, and then removing it, hit me like a physical blow. Was she doing it out of hope, or habit? Did she miss me, or was she just going through the motions of maternal care? "I've been busy," I said. "Work's been crazy." "Sarah, what's really going on?" Emma's voice got smaller, younger. "Did something happen? Are you mad at us? Mad at them?" As if this was some kind of sibling squabble that could be resolved with apologies and time. As if I was sulking over some perceived slight, instead of trying to process the fact that our father had essentially disowned me, for reasons I still didn't understand. "I'm not mad at anyone," I said, carefully. "I just have a lot going on right now. Because Christmas is coming, and Mom's been asking about your plans. She wants to know if Marcus is coming to dinner, and whether you want to do the cookie exchange like we always do. And Dad's been really weird about the whole thing." "Weird how?" "He just changes the subject whenever anyone mentions you. Jake asked if we should get you a Christmas present, and Dad said not to worry about it, that you'd probably be too busy to come anyway." Too busy to come. As if my absence was my choice, as if I was the one who'd decided to abandon the family traditions I'd grown up with. Dad was rewriting the narrative, making it seem like I was the one pulling away, like this was all my decision. "Emma," I said slowly, "has Dad said anything else about me? About why I left early on Thanksgiving?" There was a long pause. "He said you were going through some things, that you needed space to figure out your priorities." My priorities. As if caring about my family's well-being, as if being curious about their success, as if wanting to understand their business was somehow a character flaw that needed correcting. And what do you think about that? I asked. I think it's bullshit, Emma said firmly, and her use of profanity surprised me. Emma rarely swore, was the good girl of the family, the one who followed rules and avoided conflict. I think something happened that nobody's telling me about, and I think you're hurt, and I think this family is falling apart. No, Sarah, listen to me. Ever since Thanksgiving, everything's been different. Dad's been tense and angry all the time. Mom's been crying when she thinks no one's looking. Jake's been working even later hours, and won't talk to anyone about anything. And you've disappeared, so don't tell me this is about work stress, or being busy, because I'm not stupid. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the secret I was carrying. Emma deserved to know the truth, but what was the truth? That our father had given me an ultimatum I couldn't accept. That there were apparently family secrets worth disowning a daughter to protect. That I'd been cast out for asking the wrong questions. It's complicated, I said finally. Then uncomplicated. Emma said, talk to me. I'm your sister. Are you? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Are you my sister, Em? Because Dad made it pretty clear on Thanksgiving that I'm not part of this family anymore. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought the call had been dropped. Finally Emma whispered, what do you mean? And so I told her. Not everything, because I still didn't understand everything myself, but I told her about the meeting in Dad's office, about the attorney, about the papers I'd refused to sign. I told her about the ultimatum, and the choice I'd been forced to make. I told her about driving home alone, while she and Jake and Mom and Grandma Rose had Thanksgiving dinner without me. When I finished, Emma was crying. I could hear her trying to muffle the sound, probably so whoever else was in the house wouldn't hear her. Sarah, that's insane, she said through her tears. Dad wouldn't do that. He loves you. I thought he did too, I said. But apparently love comes with conditions I wasn't aware. What were the papers about? What was he so afraid you'd find? I don't know, I admitted. That's what's driving me crazy. I asked a few innocent questions about the business. And suddenly I'm being treated like a corporate spy. What kind of question? I told her about my conversations with Jake. About my curiosity regarding the large contract. About the timeline and logistics that had seemed unusual to my marketing trained eye. As I spoke, I realized how innocent it all sounded. How completely disproportionate Dad's reaction had been. That's it? Emma asked. That's what this is about. As far as I can tell, then there has to be more to it. Emma said, there has to be something we don't know about. She was still including me in the family unit, still thinking of us as a team, working together to solve a problem. It was the first time since Thanksgiving that I'd felt like I belonged anywhere. Maybe, I said. But Dad made it clear that asking questions wasn't allowed, and I can't promise to stop being curious about my own fate. You shouldn't have to, Emma said fiercely. Sarah, this is wrong. Whatever's going on, whatever Dad's hiding, you don't deserve to be punished for caring about us. Tell him that. Maybe I will, Emma said. And there was something in her voice that worried me. Don't make this worse for yourself. If Dad's willing to disown me for asking questions, imagine what he'd do to you for defending me. I don't care, Emma said. You're my sister. You've always been there for me. And I'm not going to abandon you now just because Dad's lost his mind. After we hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt since Thanksgiving. Hope. Not hope that the situation would be resolved. Not hope that Dad would change his mind. But hope that I wasn't completely alone. Emma knew the truth now, and she was on my side. Whatever else happened, I had one ally in the family I'd been exiled from. But that hope was short-lived. 2 days later, Emma called again. This time, her voice was different. Scared. Sarah, I can't talk long. Dad's in the shower, but he'll be out soon. What's wrong? I tried to talk to him, Emma said quietly. About you, about Thanksgiving. I told him I thought he was being unfair. My stomach dropped. Emma, what did you say? I said you were my sister, and that I loved you and that whatever was happening wasn't fair. Emma whispered into the phone. Sarah, he went ballistic. I've never seen him like that before. He started yelling about loyalty and family unity and how I was too young to understand the bigger picture. I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white. What else did he say? He said that you made your choice when you refused to sign those papers. He said that anyone who defended you, or tried to maintain contact with you, was choosing to put the entire Emma's voice cracked. Sarah, he said that if I kept talking to you, I'd be making the same mistake you did. The implications hit me like a sledgehammer. Dad wasn't just cutting me out. He was demanding that everyone cut me out too. He was forcing my siblings to choose between Emma and me, using the same ultimatum tactics that had destroyed my relationship with him. Emma, I'm so sorry. I never wanted to drag you into this. You didn't drag me into anything, Emma said firmly, though I could hear the fear in her voice. But Sarah, there's something else. Something I found out after I talked to Dad. What? I went to Jake's apartment last night. I needed to talk to someone about all this, and I thought maybe he'd help me understand what was really going on. Emma paused, and I could hear her moving around, probably checking to make sure she wasn't being overheard. Jake's scared. Sarah, really scared. More scared than I've ever seen. Scared of what? That's just it. He wouldn't tell me directly, but he kept talking around something. He kept saying things like, you don't understand how much is at stake, and Dad's trying to protect all of us, and some things are bigger than family feelings. I felt a chill run down my spine. What do you think I felt a chill run down my spine. What do you think he meant? I think Jake knows what Dad's hiding, Emma said. I think that's why he's been working so many late hours, why he's been so stressed. He's not just helping with the business books. Sarah, he's helping Dad cover something up. The pieces started falling into place with horrible clarity. Jake's evasiveness, when I'd asked about the contracts. His reluctance to discuss the company's sudden growth. The way he'd looked at me in the kitchen on Thanksgiving. Like he was seeing someone who was already gone. Did you ask him directly? I tried. But he shut down completely. He said I needed to trust Dad. And stop asking questions, just like he told you. But Sarah, before I left, I saw something. What? Jake had papers spread out all over his dining room table. Financial documents, contracts, bank statements. I only got a quick look, but some of the numbers didn't make sense. There were payments listed that were way higher than what the contracts should have been worth. My marketing background kicked in. The analytical part of my brain that Dad had apparently been so afraid of. Payments higher than contract values could mean several things. None of them good. Inflated billing, money laundering, kickbacks, tax fraud, any number of financial crimes that would explain why Dad was so desperate to keep family members from asking questions. Emma, you need to be careful. If Dad's involved in something illegal, and if Jake's helping him cover it up, then you could be in danger just by knowing about. I know, Emma said. But I can't just pretend I don't know. I can't just go back to Sunday dinners and Christmas mornings and act like everything's normal when my sister's been exiled and my brother's involved in something that's making him sick with worry. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. But Sarah, I want you to know that whatever Dad said, whatever threats he made, you're still my sister. You're still family, and I'm not going to let him erase you from our lives without a fight. After Emma hung, I sat in my apartment staring at the wall, trying to process what I'd learned. The business that Dad was so proud of, the success that had elevated our family's status in the community, was apparently built on something illegal. The contracts I'd been curious about were probably fraudulent. The growth I'd admired was likely the result of criminal activity, and Jake knew. My older brother, the accountant who'd always been so ethical and by the book, was helping Dad commit financial crime. No wonder he'd looked so terrible on Thanksgiving. No wonder he'd been working such long hours. He wasn't just managing legitimate business accounts, he was helping Dad cook the books. I thought about all the times over the past year, when Dad had seemed stressed, when he'd been short-tempered or distracted. I'd attributed it to the normal pressures of running a growing business, but now I wondered if it was the stress of maintaining a criminal enterprise. How long had this been going on? How deep did the corruption go? How many people in the community had been defrauded? The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Not just angry about being disowned, but angry about being lied to my entire life. The man I'd idolized, the father I'd looked up to as a model of integrity and hard work, was apparently a criminal. The family business I'd been so proud of was a front for fraud. The success story I'd bragged about to friends and colleagues was built on stolen money. I started researching. It began innocently enough, just looking up public records about Mitchell Construction's recent projects. Most of the information was available online through the county's building permit database and the Secretary of State's business registration system. I told myself I was just trying to understand what I'd stumbled into, just trying to make sense of Dad's extreme reaction to my questions. What I found made my blood run cold. The Morrison contract, the one that had first caught my attention, was for a municipal building project worth $2.3 million. But according to the public records, the city had only budgeted $1.8 million for the project. The extra $500,000 had come from somewhere, and it wasn't reflected in any the public documentation. The Henderson project was even worse. The contract was dated 6 months before the project had been approved by the City Planning Commission. Dad had been billing for work that hadn't even been authorized yet, work that might never be authorized. I found pattern after pattern of inflated contracts, duplicate billing, and payments that didn't correspond to any legitimate work. Mitchell Construction wasn't just successful, it was systematically defrauding municipal governments across 3 counties. And that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that I recognized some of the signatures on the approval documents. Tom Henderson, the mayor of Millbrook. Carol Stevens, the head of the County Planning Commission. David Morrison, who oversaw municipal contracts for the entire region. These weren't just Dad's clients. These were people I'd known my entire life. People who'd attended our church. People who'd been guests at our Sunday dinners. Uncle Tom, Dad's brother, was listed as a consulting engineer on several projects despite never having worked in construction. This wasn't just fraud. This was a conspiracy involving multiple public officials, and my family was at the center of it. I printed everything I could find, creating a file that grew thicker each day as I dug deeper into the public records. I cross-referenced dates and payments, traced money flows through shell companies, and identified patterns of corruption that went back at least 3 years. The scope of it was staggering. We weren't talking about minor billing irregularities or small-scale tax evasion. This was a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise that had corrupted the entire local government structure. And Dad had built it all while maintaining the facade of being an upstanding community member, a devoted family man. I understood now why he'd been so afraid of my questions. I understood why he'd been willing to disown me, rather than risk exposure. I understood why Jake was so scared. And why Emma had been warned against defending me. This wasn't about family loyalty or business confidentiality. This was about a criminal conspiracy that could send multiple people to prison for decades. But understanding didn't make the betrayal hurt any less. If anything, it made it worse. Dad hadn't just rejected me. He'd rejected me to protect a criminal enterprise built on lies and theft. He'd chosen fraud over family, chosen crime over his own daughter. I spent days wrestling with what to do with the information I'd gathered. Part of me wanted to march into the FBI field office and dump everything on their desk, to watch Dad's entire corrupt empire come crashing down around him. Part of me wanted to confront him directly, to force him to explain how he justified stealing from the communities that trusted him. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the father who'd taught me to ride a bike and walked me down the aisle at graduation, wanted to give him a chance to make this right. Maybe if I approached him with what I'd found, maybe if I offered him an ultimatum of his own, I could force him to stop the criminal activity and make restitution without destroying the entire family. I was naive enough to think that blood might still mean something, that the bond between father and daughter might be stronger than the bonds of criminal conspiracy. I was wrong. I called Dad's office on a Thursday morning in late December. His secretary, Mrs. Patterson, had known me since I was a child. Her voice was warm and familiar when she answered the phone. "Sarah, how lovely to hear from you, dear. How are you doing?" "I'm fine, Mrs. Patterson. Is Dad available? I need to speak with him about something important." Oh honey, he's in meetings all day. But I could probably squeeze you in tomorrow afternoon, if it's urgent. It's urgent, I said. Tell him it's about the Morrison contract. There was a pause. The Morrison contract. He'll know what I mean. Patterson put me on hold for several minutes. When she came back, her voice changed. It was cooler, more professional. I'm sorry, Sarah, but your father says he's not available to meet with you. Did you tell him what it was about? I did, and he was very clear. He said to tell you that he has nothing to discuss with you regarding any business matters. Mrs. Patterson, please. Just tell him I found the records. Tell him I know about the inflated contracts and the payments that don't match the work. Tell him I know about Uncle Tom's consulting fees and the dates that don't add up. Another long pause. Sarah dear, I think you should speak with your father about family matters at home, not at the office. He won't speak with me at home either. Miss Patterson, I've been cut off from the family. This is the only way I can reach him. I'm sorry to hear that, honey, but I can't help you. Your father was very specific about not taking calls from you regarding business matters. That evening, I tried a different approach. I drove to the house on Maple Street and parked across the street, waiting for Dad to come home from work. I felt like a stalker, like someone with no right to be in this neighborhood, but I was desperate for a conversation that might salvage something from the wreckage of our relationship. Dad's truck pulled into the driveway at 6:15, the same time he'd been coming home for as long as I could remember. I watched him gather his lunch cooler and paperwork from the cab, watched him walk up the front steps with the same measured pace he'd always used. He looked older than I remembered, more tired, more burdened. I waited until he'd been inside for a few minutes, then walked across the street and knocked on the front door. Mom answered, and the look on her face when she saw me was heartbreaking. It was joy and fear, and confusion all mixed together. Sarah, she whispered, what are you doing here? I need to talk to Dad. It's important. Honey, you know you can't be here. He made that very clear. Mom, please, just 5 minutes. I have information he needs to know about. Information about what? Before I could answer, Dad appeared behind her. His face went through a series of expressions: surprise, anger, and finally cold determination. You need to leave, he said quietly. Now, Dad, I know about the contracts. I know about the fraud. Mom looked back and forth between us, clearly not understanding what we were talking about. Dad's jaw tightened. I don't know what you think you know, but you're wrong, and you're trespassing. I have documentation, I said, public records, payment discrepancies, dates that don't match approvals. I know what you've been doing. Dad stepped around Mom and onto the front porch, closing the door behind him. When he spoke, his voice was deadly quiet.
Have no idea what you're messing with. You have no idea how many people could be hurt by your amateur detective work. People are already being hurt, I said. The taxpayers who are funding your inflated contracts. The legitimate contractors who are losing bids to your rigged system. The public officials who are going to go down with you when this all comes out. When what comes out? Dad asked. You think you've discovered some great conspiracy? You think you're going to expose corruption and be some kind of hero? I think you're stealing from the community that trusts you. I think you've turned Jake into an accomplice. I think you've built our family's success on criminal activity. Dad stared at me for a long moment. Then he laughed. A sound completely devoid of humor. You want to know the truth, Sarah? You want to know what you've stumbled into? Yes. The truth is that everyone's involved. The mayor, the planning commission, the county supervisors, the state inspectors, everyone takes their cut, everyone benefits, and everyone keeps quiet. This isn't some elaborate criminal conspiracy. This is how business gets done. I felt sick. That doesn't make it right. Right. Dad's voice rose slightly. You want to talk about right. You think it's right that honest contractors can't get work unless they pay bribes? You think it's right that projects sit in approval hell for years unless someone greases the right palms? I didn't create this system, Sarah. I just learned how to work within it. By stealing millions of dollars. By feeding my family, Dad snapped. By building a business that employs 30 people. By making sure my children could go to college and have opportunities I never had. Built on lies. Built on reality, Dad said. The reality that idealism doesn't pay mortgages or put food on tables. The reality that sometimes you have to compromise your principles to protect the people you love. Is that what you told yourself when you decided to disown me? That you were protecting the people you love? Dad's expression hardened again. I told myself that I had to choose between one daughter's naive sense of justice and the survival of my entire family. It wasn't a difficult choice. The words hit me like physical blows. He was admitting it all, the fraud, the corruption, the choice to prioritize criminal profits over his relationship with me. And he was doing it without a trace of shame or regret. What happens when it all comes out? I asked. Because it will come out eventually. These things always do. Maybe, Dad said. But not because of you. Because if you try to expose this, if you take your little file of public records to the authorities, you won't just be destroying me. You'll be destroying Jake, who's on paper as the company accountant. You'll be destroying Uncle Tom, whose name is on consulting contracts. You'll be destroying your mother, who signed loan documents as a co-owner of the business. The full scope of the trap became clear. Dad hadn't just involved himself in criminal activity, he'd made sure that the entire family was legally implicated. If the fraud came to light, everyone would go down together. You planned this, I said, stunned by the calculated cruelty of it. You made sure everyone was complicit so no one could expose you without destroying themselves. I made sure my family was protected, Dad said. Everyone except you. Apparently, you were always too independent, too principled, too willing to put abstract ideals above family loyalty. And now you have a choice, Dad said. You can walk away and build a life somewhere else, somewhere far from this family and this business. Or you can try to be a hero and watch everyone you supposedly love go to prison. I looked at him standing there on the porch of the house where I'd grown up, the house where he'd taught me about honesty and integrity, and doing the right thing. The man who'd raised me to be independent and principled was now using those same qualities to justify cutting me out of his life. There's a third option, I said quietly. Which is, I could make you an offer. Stop the fraud. Make restitution where possible. Transition to legitimate business practices. And maybe, just maybe, I keep what I know to myself. Dad studied my face for a long moment. Then he shook his head. You still don't understand, do you? This isn't something I can just stop. This system involves too many people, too much money, too many interconnected relationships. Even if I wanted to go legitimate, which I don't, the other players wouldn't let me. Then you've made your choice. I made my choice 3 years ago when I decided to secure my family's future instead of depending on the honesty and fairness of a system that rewards neither. You made your choice on Thanksgiving when you decided your principles were more important than your family. I turned to go, then looked back one more time. When this all falls apart, and it will, remember that I gave you a chance to make it right. When you're sitting alone in your apartment with your principles and your sense of justice for company, Dad replied, remember that I gave you a chance to be part of something bigger than your individual conscience. I walked back to my car, feeling like I'd just attended a funeral. In a way, I had. The father I'd grown up loving was dead, replaced by a stranger who valued criminal profits over his daughter's well-being. The family I'd thought was built on love and mutual support was actually built on lies and mutual complicity. But as I drove back to Cleveland, something else began to grow inside me alongside the grief and betrayal. It was anger, pure and focused and determined. Dad thought he could force me to choose between justice and family, between my principles and my love for the people who'd raised me. He was wrong. I was going to find a third option, one he hadn't considered. I was going to save my family from the criminal conspiracy he'd trapped them in, whether they wanted to be saved or not. And I was going to make sure that the communities he'd been stealing from got justice, even if it meant destroying everything I'd once thought was sacred. Dad had taught me to be independent and principled. Now he was going to learn that those lessons had consequences he'd never imagined. I spent the next 2 weeks building a case that would have made any prosecutor proud. My marketing background had taught me how to analyze data, identify patterns, and present complex information in compelling ways. Now I was using those skills for something Dad had never anticipated when he'd been so proud of my career achievements. I reached out to Rachel Cohen, my best friend from college who'd become a lawyer specializing in white-collar crime. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Cleveland, far from Millbrook and the network of corruption I was preparing to expose. Sarah, what you're describing sounds like a RICO case.
Rachel said after I'd walked her through the documentation I'd assembled. Racketeering, conspiracy, fraud on multiple levels. This isn't just your dad cutting corners. This is organized crime. How organized? You've identified at least 12 public officials taking kickbacks, 6 shell companies funneling money, and a systematic pattern of fraud dating back over 3 years. The federal government would definitely be interested in this. Rachel spread my documents across the coffee shop table, her experienced eye scanning financial records and contracts with the kind of focused intensity I'd seen her use in law school. But here's the thing, Sarah. If you're right about your family members being implicated, prosecuting this case could destroy all of them. Your brother Jake, your uncle, even your mother if she signed financial documents as a business co-owner. I know, I said quietly. That's exactly what Dad was counting on when he made his ultimatum. So what's your goal here? Justice? Revenge? Protecting your family? Because those objectives might be mutually exclusive. I'd been wrestling with that question since my confrontation with Dad. What did I actually want? I wanted the fraud to stop, wanted the stolen money returned to the communities it belonged to, wanted the corrupt officials removed from positions where they could continue causing harm. But I also wanted to protect Jake and Mom from the consequences of Dad's choices, wanted to find a way to separate the innocent victims from the guilty conspirators. I want to give them a chance to make this right, I said finally. But if they won't take that chance, then I want justice for the people they've been stealing from. Rachel nodded slowly. There might be a way to structure this that protects some family members while still holding the primary conspirators accountable. The federal prosecutors have discretion in how they handle cases like this, especially when they have cooperation from someone with inside knowledge. What kind of cooperation? The kind where you wear a wire and get your father to admit to criminal activity on tape. The suggestion hit me like a punch to the stomach. You want me to secretly record conversations with my own father? I want you to think about what kind of evidence would be most compelling to federal prosecutors. Rachel said carefully. Right now, you have public records that show suspicious patterns, but you don't have direct evidence of criminal intent. You don't have recordings of the conspiracy being planned or executed. You don't have admissions of guilt. I have Dad's admission that everyone's involved, that this is how business gets done. You have an unrecorded conversation on a front porch where he could claim he was speaking hypothetically or exaggerating. Rachel corrected, that won't hold up in court. I stared at the documents spread across our table, thinking about what Rachel was suggesting. Recording conversations with Dad would be a betrayal on a level that went beyond anything he'd done to me. It would be using his trust, what little remained of our relationship, to gather evidence against him. But then I thought about the communities he'd been stealing from. The legitimate contractors who'd lost work to his rigged system, the taxpayers who were funding his criminal enterprise without knowing it. Didn't they deserve justice more than Dad deserved protection from the consequences of his own choices? How would it work? I asked. You'd meet with federal agents, explain the situation, and volunteer to cooperate in their investigation. They'd provide you with recording equipment and coach you on how to guide conversations toward admissions of criminal activity. Then you'd arrange meetings with your father and other family members under the pretense of trying to reconcile. Pretense? Sarah, you can't go into this thinking you're actually going to reconcile with your family. You have to accept that once you start cooperating with federal investigators, you're choosing justice over family relationships. There's no middle ground. I thought about Emma, about her fierce loyalty and her willingness to defend me against Dad's ultimatums. I thought about Jake, scared and complicit but possibly more victim than villain. I thought about Mom, who'd signed documents she probably didn't understand, who'd been brought into the conspiracy without fully realizing what she was agreeing to. What happens to the family members who were coerced or manipulated into participating? That depends on the prosecutors and the evidence. If we can show that Jake was following orders from your father, that your mother was signing documents without understanding their implications, that they were victims of the conspiracy rather than willing participants, they might qualify for immunity deals. And Dad, your father is going to prison, Rachel said bluntly. The only question is for how long and whether he takes everyone else down with him. I left the coffee shop with Rachel's business card and a commitment to think about what she'd proposed. The drive back to my apartment gave me time to process the magnitude of what I was considering. I wasn't just thinking about exposing Dad's crimes anymore. I was thinking about becoming an active participant in a federal investigation that would destroy the life I'd grown up in. But what was the alternative? Let the fraud continue indefinitely. Allow Dad to keep stealing from communities that trusted him. Watch Jake slowly destroy himself with guilt and fear. Stand by while more public officials were corrupted and more legitimate businesses were cheated out of contracts they'd earned. That evening, I called Marcus and told him I needed to talk to him about something serious. We met at my apartment and I found myself in the surreal position of explaining to my boyfriend that my family was involved in a criminal conspiracy, and that I was considering cooperating with federal investigators to expose them. Marcus listened without interrupting, his expression growing more shocked and confused as I laid out the evidence I'd gathered. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "Sarah, are you absolutely sure about this? These are some pretty serious accusations." "I have documentation," I said, showing him the file I'd assembled. "Public records, financial discrepancies, patterns of fraud going back years." Marcus studied the papers, his software engineer's mind processing the data methodically. "This does look bad," he admitted. "But have you considered that there might be explanations you haven't thought of? Maybe the contracts are legitimate and you're misinterpreting the paperwork." I confronted Dad about it. He admitted that everyone was involved, that this is how business gets done. "But you don't have that conversation recorded." "No, so it's your word against his if this ever goes to court." I stared at Marcus, trying to understand what he was really saying. "Do you think I'm lying about what Dad told me? I think you're upset about being cut off from your family, and maybe that's affecting how you're interpreting information," Marcus said carefully. "I think you should be very careful about making accusations that could destroy innocent people's lives." "Innocent people?" I couldn't hide the disbelief in my voice. "Marcus, they've stolen millions of dollars from taxpayers. How are they innocent?" "If they've stolen millions of dollars," Marcus corrected, "you're making assumptions based on incomplete information. Then what do you think I should do?" "I think you should try to reconcile with your family," Marcus said. "I think you should accept that there are things about their business you don't understand, and focus on rebuilding your relationships instead of trying to prove they're criminals." I felt like I was talking to a stranger. This was the man I'd been planning to marry, the man who was supposed to support me through difficult times, the man who I thought would share my values about honesty and justice. Instead, he was essentially telling me to ignore criminal activity for the sake of family harmony. "What if I'm right?" I asked. "What if they are stealing money and corrupting public officials? Should I just pretend I don't know about it?" "I think you should ask yourself what's more important, being right or having a family. Those shouldn't be mutually exclusive." "But they are, in this case," Marcus said. "You can't expose your family as criminals and expect to maintain relationships with them. You have to choose." I realized in that moment that Marcus didn't really understand me at all. He saw my investigation as a vindictive response to being rejected by my family, not as a genuine attempt to uncover the truth. He valued social harmony over moral principles, preferred comfortable lies to uncomfortable truths. "I need some time to think," I told him. "Of course," Marcus said, reaching for my hand. "But Sarah, please don't do anything irreversible. Don't throw away your family over suspicions and speculation." After Marcus left, I sat alone in my apartment contemplating the full scope of my isolation. My father had disowned me for asking inconvenient questions. My family was complicit in a criminal conspiracy that I couldn't ignore. My boyfriend thought I should prioritize relationships over justice. I was completely alone with the truth, and no one seemed to want me to act on it. But then I thought about the taxpayers in Millbrook and the surrounding counties, people who worked hard to pay the taxes that Dad was systematically stealing. I thought about the honest contractors who'd lost legitimate bids to Dad's rigged system. I thought about the communities that were being cheated out of the quality construction they'd paid for, because inflated contracts meant corners would be cut to maintain profit margins. Those people deserve justice, even if pursuing it meant sacrificing my own comfort and relationships. I called Rachel the next morning. "I want to move forward," I told her. "I want to cooperate with the federal investigation. Are you sure this isn't something you can take back once it starts?" "I'm sure." Rachel arranged a meeting with Special Agent Jennifer Hayes from the FBI's White Collar Crime Unit. We met in a sterile conference room at the federal building in Cleveland, where Agent Hayes listened to my story with the kind of professional detachment that somehow made it easier to talk about the most painful aspects of my family's betrayal. Miss Mitchell, the information you've provided aligns with some concerns we've had about municipal contracting in your area, Agent Hayes said after I'd finished my presentation. We've been looking at irregularities in several counties, but we haven't had an inside source who could help us understand the scope of the conspiracy. So you'll investigate. We're already investigating, Agent Hayes said. The question is whether you're willing to help us build a case that will actually result in convictions. What would that involve? Recorded conversations with your father and other family members, documentation of the fraud from inside the business, evidence of the conspiracy's structure and the roles played by various participants. Agent Hayes explained the process in detail. I would be provided with recording equipment and trained on how to use it effectively. I would attempt to re-establish contact with family members under the pretense of wanting to reconcile. I would guide conversations toward topics that would elicit admissions of criminal activity. I need to warn you that this could be dangerous, Agent Hayes said. If your father suspects that you're working with law enforcement, if he realizes you're recording conversations, there could be serious. What kind of consequences? People involved in multi-million-dollar criminal conspiracies have been known to take extreme measures to protect themselves, Agent Hayes said, carefully. We would provide you with protection and support, but there are inherent risks in this kind of undercover work. I thought about Dad's transformation from loving father to cold stranger, about his willingness to disown me for asking questions, about his calculated cruelty in making sure all the family members were legally implicated in his crimes. If he was capable of that level of betrayal, what else might he be capable of? I understand the risks, I said. When do we start? The training process took 2 weeks. I learned how to use miniaturized recording equipment, how to position myself to capture clear audio, how to guide conversations without appearing suspicious. I practiced with role-playing exercises where FBI agents pretended to be my family members, learning how to prompt admissions without seeming like I was interrogating them. The hardest part was learning to compartmentalize my emotions, to separate the daughter who still loved her family from the cooperating witness who was gathering evidence against them. Agent Hayes explained that I couldn't allow myself to feel guilty about what I was doing, couldn't second-guess the decision I'd made to pursue justice. Remember that you didn't create this situation, she told me during one of our training sessions. Your father made the choice to involve his family in criminal activity. Your father made the choice to threaten you with exile, rather than address the underlying crimes. You're not betraying your family. You're giving them an opportunity to face the consequences of choices they made. On a cold February morning, I made my first recorded contact with Dad in 3 months. I called his office, knowing that Mrs. Patterson would recognize my voice, and hoping that the passage of time might have softened his position. Mitchell Construction, this is Patricia speaking. Mrs. Patterson, it's Sarah. I was hoping I could speak with Dad about a family matter. There was a pause, longer than the ones I'd experienced in December. Oh honey, let me check if he's available. This time when she put me on hold, I was recording everything. The device hidden in my purse was capturing every word, every silence, every nuance that might be relevant to the federal investigation. Sarah, Dad's voice came on the line, cautious but not hostile. What's this about? I miss my family, I said, which was completely true even though it wasn't the whole truth. I miss Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations. I miss being part of something bigger than myself. And what does that mean, exactly? It means I'm willing to accept that there are things about the business I don't need to understand. It means I'm willing to sign whatever papers you think are necessary to protect the family. Another pause. I could almost hear Dad calculating, trying to determine whether my change of heart was genuine or a trap. Where are you calling from? My apartment. Dad, I've had 3 months to think about what you said on Thanksgiving. About family loyalty and bigger pictures and protecting the people we love. And maybe you were right. Maybe I was being naive about how the world actually works. Maybe I was putting my abstract principles ahead of my family's well-being. Maybe. I've been thinking about Jake, about how stressed he's been. I've been thinking about Emma, about how this whole situation is affecting her. I've been thinking about Mom, about what it must be like for her to have her family torn apart over something I don't fully understand. You could have thought about those things 3 months ago. I know, I was angry and hurt, and not thinking clearly, but I've had time to gain some perspective. Dad was quiet for so long I thought the call had been disconnected. Finally he spoke. What exactly are you proposing, Sarah? I'm proposing that I come home, that I sign whatever documents you think are necessary, that I accept my role in the family without asking questions that make everyone uncomfortable. And in return, I get my family back. I get Sunday dinners and Christmas mornings, and the feeling of belonging somewhere. It's not that simple, Dad said. Too much has happened. Too much has been said. Then help me understand what I need to do to make it right. Another long pause. I could hear Dad breathing, could almost feel him weighing the benefits of bringing me back into the fold against the risks of trusting someone who'd already proven troublesome. We'd need to meet face to face, he said finally. We'd need to have a conversation about expectations and boundaries. I'd like that. Not at the house. Somewhere neutral. Whatever you think is best. The office. Tomorrow evening after the crew goes home. 7 o'clock. I'll be there. Sarah, Dad's voice carried a warning. Don't bring anyone with you. Don't tell anyone about this meeting. This conversation stays between us until we figure out if there's a path forward. I understand. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment trying to process what had just happened. I just manipulated my father into a meeting where I planned to record him admitting to criminal activity. I used his love for family, his desire to repair our relationship, as bait to lure him into a trap. But I'd also felt something unexpected during our conversation. Hope. Not hope that we could actually reconcile. Because I knew that was impossible now. But hope that maybe Dad could be convinced to minimize the damage to the rest of the family. Maybe if I presented him with evidence of federal interest in his activities. Maybe if I explained the inevitability of exposure. He could be persuaded to cooperate in a way that protected Jake and Mom and Emma. I called Agent Hayes to report on the conversation and to confirm the plans for the next evening's meeting. You did well, she told me. He's agreed to meet, which means he's at least considering the possibility of bringing you back into the conspiracy. That gives us an opening to gather evidence about the scope of the criminal activity. What if he just wants to threaten me again? Then we record the threats, and we have evidence of obstruction of justice to add to the fraud charges. What if he wants me to sign papers that would make me legally complicit in the crimes? Then you sign them, and we use that as evidence of how the conspiracy operates. Don't worry about legal liability for yourself. The federal prosecutors have already agreed to provide you with immunity in exchange for your cooperation. That evening, I called Emma to let her know I was trying to reconcile with Dad. I didn't mention the recording equipment or the federal investigation, but I wanted her to know that I was making an effort to repair the family relationships she cared so much about. Sarah, that's wonderful, Emma said, and I could hear the relief in her voice. I've been so worried about you, so worried about all of us. How has everyone been? Stressed, scared. Jake's been working 16-hour days. Mom's been crying a lot, and Dad's been angrier than I've ever seen him. This whole situation has been tearing us apart. Hopefully we can start fixing that. Do you really think Dad will take you back, after everything that's happened? I don't know, I said honestly, but I have to try. Sarah, can I ask you something? Of course. When you were asking those questions about the business, when you were curious about the contracts and the money, did you find anything? Anything that would explain why Dad reacted so strongly? I closed my eyes, hating that I had to lie to her. Emma, I think Dad was right that I was asking questions about things I didn't understand. I think I was seeing problems where there weren't. Really? I've spent 3 months researching business practices and construction industry standards, and I've realized that a lot of what seems suspicious to me is actually normal in this field. It wasn't completely a lie. I had spent 3 months researching, and I had learned a lot about construction industry practices. I just hadn't learned what Emma hoped I'd learned. That's such a relief, Emma said. I was so afraid that there might be something actually wrong, something that could hurt the whole family. There's nothing wrong that can't be fixed. I said, which was true in a way Emma wouldn't understand. The next evening, I drove to Mitchell Construction's office building, carrying recording equipment hidden in my purse, and wearing a wire concealed under my sweater. Agent Hayes had assured me that the devices were undetectable, but I felt like everyone who looked at me could see the deception written across my face. The office building was dark except for the light coming from Dad's corner office. I used my old key card to access the building. Muscle memory guiding me through the familiar hallways, where I'd spent so many hours as a child, doing homework while Dad finished paperwork, helping with filing during summer breaks. Dad was waiting for me in his office, sitting behind the same oak desk where he'd delivered his ultimatum on Thanksgiving. He looked older than he had 3 months ago, more tired and worn down by the stress of maintaining his criminal enterprise. "Sarah," he said, gesturing for me to sit in one of the chairs across from his desk. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for agreeing to see me." We stared at each other for a moment. Father and daughter separated by months of anger and betrayal, but still connected by decades of shared history. "You said you wanted to come home," Dad said finally. "That you were willing to accept that there are things about the business you don't need to understand." "That's right. What changed your mind?" I thought about how to answer that question in a way that would encourage him to talk about the criminal conspiracy while still sounding believable. I realized that I was being selfish. I said, "I was putting my need to understand everything ahead of my family's need for unity and loyalty. And you're prepared to sign documents acknowledging that you have no claim to business information or decision-making authority. If that's what it takes." Dad pulled out a folder from his desk drawer and removed several legal documents. They were similar to the papers he'd tried to get me to sign on Thanksgiving, but more comprehensive and detailed. "These documents establish that you waive any right to access
business records, financial information, or operational details of Mitchell Construction," Dad said, sliding the papers across the desk. "They also acknowledge that you understand the confidential nature of family business discussions and agree to maintain complete discretion about anything you might overhear or observe." I picked up the papers and pretended to read them carefully. In reality, I was positioning myself to ensure that the recording devices could capture Dad's voice clearly. "This section about confidential family business discussions," I said, "what does that cover exactly?" "It covers conversations about contracts, relationships with clients and subcontractors, financial arrangements and business strategies like the Morrison contract." Dad's expression sharpened. "What about the Morrison contract?" I just remembered that was one of the projects I asked Jake about. "I want to make sure I understand what I'm agreeing not to discuss." "The Morrison contract is a perfect example of the kind of business arrangement that requires discretion," Dad said carefully. "It involves multiple parties with overlapping interests, and discussions about those relationships need to stay within the family. Multiple parties: the city planning office, the county approval board, various subcontractors and suppliers. Everyone involved in making a project like that successful." I could feel my heart racing as Dad began to describe the conspiracy in terms that could be interpreted as criminal activity by federal prosecutors, and those relationships require special handling. "They require understanding and flexibility," Dad said. "Sometimes the official procedures don't work the way they're supposed to. Sometimes you need to find alternative ways to ensure that good projects get approved and completed." Alternative ways. Dad leaned back in his chair, studying my face. "Sarah, why are you asking these questions? I thought you wanted to come home without needing to understand all the details." "I do want to come home," I said quickly. "I'm just trying to understand what I'm agreeing to keep confidential so I don't accidentally violate the agreement." "You're agreeing to keep everything confidential," Dad said firmly. "Every conversation, every business relationship, every financial arrangement. Everything you hear or see related to Mitchell Construction stays within the family. Even if some of those arrangements might look questionable to outsiders, especially if they might look questionable to outsiders," Dad said. "People who don't understand the construction industry, people who don't understand how municipal contracting actually works, might misinterpret legitimate business practices as something improper. Like what I did when I asked Jake about the contracts. Exactly like what you did. You saw payment schedules and approval timelines that didn't match your expectations, and you assumed something was wrong instead of recognizing that you didn't understand the industry standards." Dad was giving me exactly the kind of statements that federal prosecutors would love to hear: admissions that there were arrangements that might look questionable, acknowledgments that industry practices didn't match official procedures. So the Morrison contract payments that seemed higher than the project scope, that was normal industry practice? The Morrison contract payments reflected the actual cost of completing a project that met all requirements and satisfied all stakeholders, Dad said. Sometimes the initial contract amount doesn't account for all the work that's actually required. And the Henderson project timeline, where work was billed before official approval. Dad's expression hardened again. "Sarah, you're asking very specific questions for someone who claims she wants to stop asking questions. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to put my concerns to rest so I can sign these papers with a clear conscience." Your concerns should have been put to rest by trusting your family instead of investigating us like we were criminals. You're right, I should have trusted you. But you didn't. You spent months digging through public records, asking questions, building theories about criminal activity. The words hung in the air between us. Dad had just acknowledged that I'd been investigating him, had just confirmed that he knew about my research into the business practices he was defending. I was wrong to do that, I said. You were wrong, Dad agreed. But the question now is whether you've learned from that mistake or whether you're still looking for problems that don't exist. I've learned, have you? Because from where I'm sitting, this conversation feels like an interrogation, not a reconciliation. I could feel the situation slipping away from me, could sense Dad's growing suspicion about my motives for the meeting. Dad, I swear to you that I just want to come home. I just want to be part of the family again. Then stop asking questions about business arrangements you don't understand, Dad said sharply. Stop looking for criminal conspiracies and legitimate business practices. Stop trying to be a detective when you should be trying to be a daughter. I will you? Because if I bring you back into this family, if I trust you with confidential information again, and you betray that trust a second time, the consequences will be much more serious than being asked to leave a Thanksgiving dinner. What kind of consequences? Dad leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper that the recording equipment might not capture clearly. The kind of consequences that protect the interests of everyone involved in our business arrangements. The kind of consequences that ensure family loyalty isn't just a preference, it's a requirement. I felt a chill run down my spine. Dad wasn't just talking about disowning me anymore, he was talking about something much more sinister. Dad, are you threatening me? I'm explaining reality, Dad said quietly. This business supports 30 employees and their families. It generates millions of dollars in economic activity for the local community. It maintains relationships with dozens of public officials and private contractors. Those relationships are built on trust and mutual benefit, and they can't survive exposure or interference. And if someone threatens to expose those relationships, then that person becomes a threat to the livelihood and security of everyone involved. And threats are eliminated. I sat in stunned silence, processing what Dad had just said. He'd essentially admitted that he would resort to violence to protect his criminal conspiracy, that family loyalty wasn't just expected but enforced through intimidation and fear. I would never threaten to expose anything, I said. I hope not, Dad said. Because the people involved in our business arrangements have invested too much to allow one person's conscience to destroy everything they've built. We stared at each other across the desk, and I realized that the father I'd grown up loving was completely gone. In his place was a stranger who valued criminal profits above family relationships, who was willing to threaten his own daughter to protect his illegal enterprise. I should go, I said, standing up without signing the documents. Sarah, if you walk out of here without signing those papers, you can never come back. This is your last chance to be part of this family. I looked back at him one more time, memorizing his face so I could remember this moment when the federal agents arrested him. Then I guess I'm not part of this family after all. I walked out of Mitchell Construction for the last time, carrying recordings that would send my father to prison and evidence that would destroy the criminal conspiracy he'd built. But I'd also accomplished something I hadn't expected. I'd saved my family from the man who was supposed to protect them. 3 months later, federal agents arrested Bob Mitchell, Tom Mitchell, and 6 public officials in a coordinated sweep that dismantled the largest municipal corruption ring in Ohio's history. Jake and Mom were granted immunity in exchange for their cooperation, and Emma was never charged with any crimes. The family business was liquidated to pay restitution to the defrauded communities, but Jake used his accounting skills to start a legitimate consulting firm. Mom returned to real estate full-time and rebuilt her career on honest foundations. Emma finished nursing school and now works at a children's hospital, carrying forward the values of service and integrity that Dad had claimed to believe in. I moved to Seattle and started my own marketing consulting firm, specializing in helping small businesses build ethical and sustainable growth strategies. Marcus and I broke up, but I eventually met someone who shared my values about honesty and justice, someone who understood that doing the right thing is more important than maintaining comfortable relationships. I still think about Dad sometimes, serving his 15-year sentence in federal prison.
I wonder if he understands now that his choice to prioritize criminal profits over family relationships destroyed everything he claimed to be protecting. I wonder if he realizes that by trying to force me to choose between justice and family, he created a situation where justice became the only way to save what was worth saving about our family. Emma and I talk every week now. Jake visits when his business travel brings him to the West Coast. Mom sends Christmas cards with updates about her real estate achievements and photos of the small house she bought with her legitimate earnings. We're still a family, just not the family Dad tried to build on lies and threats and criminal conspiracy. We're the family that survived his betrayal, that chose honesty over comfortable deception, that proved that love doesn't require complicity in wrongdoing. On Thanksgiving morning, I make tea and sit by my kitchen window watching the sun rise over Puget Sound. I think about the family dinner I'm not attending, the traditions I'm not participating in, the relationships that were sacrificed to expose the truth. But I also think about the communities that got their stolen money back, the honest contractors who can now compete on level ground, the public officials who are serving their constituents instead of their own corrupt interests. Sometimes doing the right thing means losing everything you thought you wanted in order to save everything that actually matters. Sometimes making someone literally dead to you is the only way to make them truly alive. The aftermath of bringing down a criminal empire built by your own father is something no one prepares you for. The media attention was relentless for months after the arrests. Local news stations camped outside my Cleveland apartment, reporters shoving microphones in my face every time I tried to go to work, asking how it felt to send my own father to prison. National news picked up the story because of the scope of the corruption, the dollar amounts involved, and the sensational angle of a daughter exposing her father's crimes. I learned to leave my apartment building through the service entrance, to vary my routes to work, to decline all interview requests. The headlines were brutal. Daughter betrays father in federal sting. Family loyalty dies in Ohio corruption case. The whistleblower who destroyed her own blood. They painted me as either a vindictive daughter seeking revenge or a heroic whistleblower who chose justice over family. Neither narrative captured the complex reality of what had actually happened. The hardest part wasn't the media attention or the public scrutiny. The hardest part was watching my family try to rebuild their lives from the ruins of everything Dad had constructed. Jake lost his accounting practice when his client list discovered his connection to the corruption case. Even though he'd been granted immunity and was never charged with crimes, the association with fraud was enough to destroy his professional reputation. He spent 6 months unemployed, living with mom and struggling with depression before slowly building a new consulting business focused on helping small companies implement ethical financial practices. Mom's real estate career survived better than expected, partly because she'd maintained her integrity in her professional dealings even while unknowingly enabling Dad's crimes in their personal life. But she struggled with the betrayal more than anyone else. She'd been married to Dad for 32 years, had trusted him completely, had signed documents and supported decisions without understanding that she was enabling a criminal conspiracy. The realization that her entire adult life had been built on lies nearly broke her. Emma handled the situation with characteristic determination and grace. She threw herself into her nursing studies, graduated with honors and landed a position at Cleveland Children's Hospital. She became the family's anchor during the worst of the legal proceedings, the one who made sure everyone stayed connected, who organized weekly phone calls and holiday visits, who refused to let Dad's crimes destroy the relationships between the rest of us. But even Emma struggled with what I'd done. We had several difficult conversations in the months following the arrests, conversations where she questioned whether there had been other ways to handle the situation, whether I'd been too quick to involve federal authorities, whether I'd considered all the collateral damage my choices would cause. "I understand why you did it," she told me during one of those conversations. "I understand that Dad left you no choice, that he was stealing from people, that someone had to stop him. But Sarah, did you think about what it would cost the rest of us?" "I thought about it constantly," I replied. "But what was the alternative? Let him continue stealing millions of dollars. Let him corrupt more public officials. Let him drag all of you deeper into criminal liability. Maybe there was a middle way. Maybe you could have confronted him differently, given him more chances to make things right." I tried that. I offered him the opportunity to stop the fraud and make restitution. He chose to threaten me instead. "But you went to the FBI before you tried to work things out with the family." "I went to the FBI because I realized the family was already compromised." Jake was helping him with the books. You and Mom were being kept in the dark about criminal activity. Uncle Tom was taking consulting fees for fake work. There was no families to work things out with. There was just a criminal conspiracy that had trapped people I loved. These conversations were painful but necessary. Emma needed to process her anger and confusion, needed to understand my motivations, needed to work through her own feelings about loyalty and justice and family responsibility. We emerged from those discussions with a stronger relationship, but it took time. The federal investigation expanded far beyond Dad's construction company. The recordings I'd made led investigators to dozens of other contractors and suppliers who were participating in the bid rigging scheme. They uncovered bank accounts in the Cayman Islands, shell companies in Delaware, and a network of corruption that extended into 3 states. The final indictment included 47 defendants and resulted in $23 million in restitution payments to defrauded communities. Dad pled guilty to racketeering, fraud, and money laundering charges, in exchange for a reduced sentence of 15 years. Uncle Tom received 10 years. The mayor of Millbrook got 8 years. The planning commission head received 6 years. Dozens of other defendants received sentences ranging from probation to 12 years in prison. The community reaction was complex. Some people viewed me as a hero who'd exposed corruption and recovered stolen tax money. Others saw me as a traitor who destroyed a successful local business and sent beloved community members to prison. I received death threats from people who blamed me for the economic disruption caused by Mitchell Construction's closure. I also received thank you letters from taxpayers who appreciated getting their money back, and from honest contractors who could finally compete fairly for municipal work. Moving to Seattle was partly about escaping the notoriety and partly about starting fresh in a place where my story wasn't front-page news. I'd always loved the Pacific Northwest, and the distance from Ohio gave me the space I needed to process everything that had happened and figure out who I wanted to be in the aftermath of destroying my family's criminal empire. Starting my own marketing consulting firm was both practical and symbolic. I wanted to help businesses grow in ethical ways, to prove that success didn't require corruption or fraud or cutting corners. My experience with the investigation had taught me how to analyze complex financial relationships, how to identify red flags in business practices, and how to build systems that promoted transparency and accountability. My first clients were small businesses that couldn't afford big consulting firms, but needed help developing marketing strategies that would support sustainable growth. I specialized in helping companies build brands based on authentic values, in creating marketing messages that were honest and compelling without being deceptive or manipulative. The work was fulfilling in ways that my previous marketing job had never been. I wasn't just selling products or services, I was helping entrepreneurs build businesses they could be proud of. Businesses that contributed positively to their communities. Businesses that treated employees and customers with respect and integrity. One of my early clients was a construction company started by former Mitchell Construction employees who'd lost their jobs when the business was liquidated. They wanted to build a company that did honest work for fair prices, that competed on quality rather than corruption, that proved it was possible to be successful in the construction industry without bribing public officials or cutting corners on safety and materials. Working with that company was emotionally challenging, but ultimately healing. These were people who'd been victims of Dad's crimes just as much as the taxpayers who'd been overcharged for municipal projects. They'd lost their livelihoods when his criminal conspiracy collapsed, but they were determined to rebuild their careers on ethical foundations. The company succeeded. Within 3 years they'd grown from 6 employees to 25, had won several major contracts through legitimate competitive bidding, and had earned a reputation for quality work and honest dealing. They proved that it was possible to be profitable without being corrupt, that integrity wasn't a business liability but a competitive advantage. My personal life took longer to stabilize. The end of my relationship with Marcus was difficult but necessary. He never understood why I'd chosen to expose my family's crimes, never grasped that some principles are more important than personal comfort. He viewed my decision as vindictive and destructive, saw the investigation as evidence that I was willing to hurt people I claimed to love. "You destroyed your family for what?" he asked during our final conversation. "For abstract principles, for strangers who don't even know you exist. Was it worth it, Sarah? Was your conscience worth more than your relationships?" My conscience was the only thing I had left after my family tried to force me to choose between honesty and belonging, I replied. And yes, it was worth it, because the strangers I helped are real people with real lives who were being harmed by my family's crimes. Because my relationships with Jake and Emma and Mom are stronger now than they were when they were built on lies and secrets. You'll never have a normal family again. I never had a normal family to begin with. I had a family that looked normal from the outside, while being held together by criminal conspiracy and mutual complicity. What I have now is honest relationships with people who share my values, and that's worth more than the illusion of harmony I used to mistake for love. Meeting David was unexpected. He was a prosecutor who'd worked on white-collar crime cases similar to mine, someone who understood the complexity of family loyalty and moral responsibility, someone who'd seen how corruption destroys communities, and how difficult it can be to choose justice over personal relationships. We met at a conference on business ethics, where I was speaking about marketing integrity, and he was presenting on prosecutorial strategies for corporate crime. Our conversation over coffee extended into dinner, then into a weekend exploring Seattle together, then into a relationship built on shared values and mutual respect. David understood why I'd made the choices I'd made. He'd seen other cases where family members had to choose between loyalty and justice, had worked with other cooperating witnesses who'd sacrificed personal relationships to expose criminal activity. He didn't see my decision as betrayal, he saw it as courage. You did something most people couldn't do, he told me early in our relationship. You chose to protect strangers over protecting your family's secrets. That takes a kind of moral strength that's rare. It didn't feel like strength at the time. It felt like I was destroying everything I'd ever loved. But you weren't destroying the things worth loving. You were destroying the things that were built on harming other people. The relationships that survived, the family connections that endured, those were the ones worth preserving. David was right. My relationship with Emma grew stronger after the investigation, because it was no longer built on shared secrets and family loyalty. It was built on shared values and mutual respect. My relationship with Jake improved as he rebuilt his career on ethical foundations and found professional satisfaction in helping other businesses avoid the mistakes that had destroyed Mitchell Construction. My relationship with Mom deepened as she processed her anger and grief, and ultimately came to understand that I'd saved her from being further implicated in Dad's crimes. We don't have traditional family gatherings anymore. We don't spend Christmas morning opening presents under a tree in the house on Maple Street. We don't have Sunday dinners where everyone shares updates about their lives while passing dishes around a dining room table that's been in the family for generations. Instead, we have video calls where Emma shows us her latest nursing certification and Jake describes the honest small businesses he's helping grow. We have visits where Mom brings photo albums of houses she's sold, and stories about clients who appreciated her integrity and dedication. We have relationships based on who we actually are rather than who we were supposed to be. Dad writes letters sometimes. They come sporadically, maybe 3 or 4 times a year, usually around holidays or family birthdays. The letters are forwarded through the prison system and arrive with institutional stamps and security markings that remind me of where he is, and why he's there. The letters are strange documents, mixtures of self-pity and defiance, and occasional glimpses of genuine remorse. Sometimes he claims that he was protecting the family by building a successful business through whatever means necessary. Sometimes he admits that he made mistakes, but insists that he never intended to hurt anyone. Sometimes he asks for forgiveness without acknowledging the specific harm he caused. I don't respond to the letters, but I don't throw them away either. They're reminders of the man who raised me, evidence of how someone can rationalize terrible choices, documentation of the distance between the father I thought I knew and the criminal he actually was. The most recent letter arrived on the anniversary of his arrest. It was shorter than usual, more reflective than defensive. Sarah, I've had 5 years to think about what happened, about the choices I made and the consequences that followed. I still believe I was trying to provide for my family, but I understand now that I lost sight of the difference between providing and stealing, between protecting and threatening. I know you did what you thought was right, and I'm beginning to understand that maybe it was right, even though it cost us our relationship. I hope you're happy. I hope you've built a life you can be proud of. I hope you know that despite everything, I love you. I read that letter several times, looking for traces of manipulation or self-justification, searching for evidence that Dad was still trying to rationalize his crimes, or shift responsibility for their consequences. But the letter seemed genuine, seemed like it might represent actual growth and understanding. I still didn't respond, but I felt something shift inside me when I read it. Not forgiveness, exactly, and certainly not a desire to rebuild our relationship, but a recognition that the man in prison might be different from the man who'd threatened me in his office 5 years ago. The 5th anniversary of the investigation was marked by a documentary that aired on a national news magazine show. The producers interviewed me, along with Jake and Emma, and several of the FBI agents who'd worked the case. They interviewed some of the public officials who'd been prosecuted, some of the taxpayers who'd gotten restitution payments, and some of the former Mitchell construction employees who'd rebuilt their careers with other companies. Watching the documentary was surreal. Seeing my story told through news footage and interview clips and courtroom sketches made it feel like something that had happened to someone else, like a movie based on true events rather than my actual life. But the documentary also provided perspective on the broader impact of what had happened. The communities that had been defrauded had used their restitution payments to fund school improvements and infrastructure projects that had been delayed for years. The honest contractors who'd been shut out of municipal work were now thriving in a competitive environment. The culture of corruption that had seemed so entrenched and permanent had been replaced by oversight and accountability. The investigation had consequences beyond the specific crimes it exposed. Other communities implemented new safeguards for municipal contracting. Other prosecutors used similar strategies to investigate corruption in their jurisdictions. Other potential whistleblowers saw that it was possible to expose family members' crimes without destroying yourself in the process. I received dozens of messages after the documentary aired, mostly from people thanking me for my courage, but some from people in similar situations who were wrestling with whether to expose family members' criminal activity. Those messages were the most meaningful, because they reminded me that the choice I'd made hadn't just been about my specific family and my specific situation. It had been about the principle that family loyalty can't be used to justify participation in crimes that harm innocent people. Standing in my Seattle apartment on a rainy Thursday evening, reading emails from strangers who were inspired by my story, I realized that I'd finally made peace with the choice I'd made 5 years ago. I'd saved my family from their own worst impulses, had protected my community from ongoing fraud, and had demonstrated that it's possible to choose justice over comfort even when the cost is enormous. Dad had told me I was dead to him, because I wouldn't sign papers promising to ignore his crimes. In a way, he was right. The daughter who would have chosen family harmony over moral principles, who would have valued relationships over integrity, who would have stayed silent about corruption to maintain her place at the Sunday dinner table, was dead. In her place was someone stronger, someone who understood that real love sometimes requires difficult choices, someone who'd learned that you can't protect people from the consequences of their actions by pretending those actions never happened. I'm not the daughter Dad wanted me to be. I'm the daughter he raised me to be before he forgot his own lessons about honesty and integrity, and doing the right thing, even when it's difficult. And that's a person I can live with, even if it means living without the family I thought I wanted. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.